Okay, so let's quickly cover what I'm gonna, or talk about what I'm gonna cover and what I'm not gonna cover. Then we'll talk about what an enterprise encoder is. We'll look at the classes of enterprise encoders. You'll discover there are 3 classes of enterprise encoders. I call them Swiss Army knife, fast transcoders, and workflow systems. So you really want to, before you even start shopping, you want to know, which type of system do I want to buy, because they're different products for different needs. And then once we identify the various systems, we'll look at the points of differentiation, or the factors to consider when choosing an enterprise encoder. And then we'll look a little bit about what's coming. Okay, so all the products I'm going to talk about are on-demand encoders. And as I went through the presentation, though, if you're interested in buying a live encoder, a lot of the same stuff applies, right? I mean, we're going to spend a lot of time on defining your needs. And you're going to say, okay, well, what types of streams do I need to produce? Well, that's the same for live and for on-demand. And it's like DRM. What DRM needs do I have? Same, it's the same for live and on-demand. So there's a lot of this that if you're looking at a live encoder, if there's a better session for you to go to, feel free to go. But I think you'll find some value if you're looking at either live or on-demand products. Not talking about video conferencing or any other kind of conferencing. And my focus is really, primarily on the desktop, mobile, and compatible markets. HLS plays on a lot of OTT devices, but I'm not going to be talking about traditional broadcast. It's streaming type formats. And I'm talking about locally installed products, not the cloud. Okay, so just wanted to let you know what I was going to be talking about so you could see if it's a good fit for your time. Some of the information we'll cover here is in a book that I finished and published in April of 2013. I think I've got 2 copies left. It's a $40 book. I'm selling it for $20. So if you want to pick up a copy, come see me after the presentation. So what is an enterprise encoder? A lot of people know Squeeze Desktop. How is Squeeze Server different from Squeeze Desktop, and how is Episode Pro different from Episode Engine? What is an enterprise encoder? And that's going to vary by product, but here's some concepts to keep in mind. Enterprise encoders are built for shared use, and typically that's managed through 3 or more schemas. One is direct UI, one is watch folder encoding, and one is API-based encoding. So Squeeze Desktop does not have an API. You can't write to it. You can use the watch folder, you can use the UI, but you can't automate it to your content management system, to your digital asset management system, to your media asset management system, because there is no API for doing that. A lot of products like Squeeze and Episode, the desktop versions are slowed down in some way. So Episode Pro can encode 2 files simultaneously. It can't do split and stitch, which is a way to divide a single file up into multiple components so you can encode it faster on multiple core systems. Episode Engine can do that. Most desktop products are not scalable. Sorenson Squeeze is a standalone product. If you have a bunch on a network, they can't talk to each other, they can't help each other. Adobe Media Encoder, same thing. There are some desktop encoders that can cluster like that. Compressor is one of them, Episode Pro is one of them, but typically, if you're looking at scalability, that's what you want an enterprise encoder for, particularly if you're looking at features like failover. So that's something a desktop encoder can't give you. You would expect at this point that an enterprise encoder will give you all relevant output formats, and that includes single file H.264 in whatever container format you need, whether it's MP4 or F4V or M4V. Support for both video and manifest files, output support for HTTP live streaming, HTTP dynamic streaming or HDS from Adobe, smooth streaming from Microsoft. And all of the enterprise encoders that you're going to be looking at today should at least have a plan for what they're going to do for Dash. Some support Dash already. I don't really know what that means because there's no players, but they have Dash support. And typically, well, how many people here care about closed captioning? That's Squeeze 9 is the first desktop product to come out, and it's got closed captioning support, but otherwise, no other desktop encoder has support for closed captioning, and that's going to become more and more important for everybody. And then DRM support. How many people care about DRM? Okay, so DRM is another feature you're not going to see on a desktop product. So, if you want to support those types of features in the video that you're distributing, you're going to have to move up to an enterprise encoder. Enterprise encoders, we talked about the API a bit. They programmable via the API or via plugins. Interestingly, enterprise encoders can be hardware, they can be software, and they can even be command line. It's kind of funny. You wouldn't think FFmpeg was a enterprise encoder, but that's what YouTube uses for all their encodes, and they encode more than anybody. So, that would qualify as kind of an enterprise encoder. And I think a lot of people, most of the UGC companies, a lot of big media companies are using FFmpeg as their encoding engine. They can, build their own infrastructure on top of it. It's free, and they can make it do exactly what they want to do by programming above it. So we're not going to talk any more about FFmpeg, but I just wanted to throw it out there. X.264 is a very high quality H.264 codec, and that's what FFmpeg gives you. Okay, so enterprise encoders fall into 3 classes, and obviously it's important to know what you're shopping for before you go shopping. Class 1 is the Swiss Army knife transcoder. This is Rosette Carbon Coder or Episode Engine. These are products that take in every format known to man. They produce every format known to man or woman. So if you're looking for a product that kind of gets you from intermediate formats or camera formats or H.264 encoded files in any kind of number of file formats, that's what you're looking for, a Swiss Army knife transcoder. So if you're looking for a product that can output, ProRes or Avid DNX HD, Elemental Server's not going to do that, right? If you're looking at a product that can help you glue together all the various disparate formats that you're working with, this is the category that you want. If you're looking for a product to produce H.264 files as quickly as possible, this is not the category that you want. Okay, the high volume transcoders or encoders, often these have limited I/O format support. Harmonic's got a new box out called Express, and the only input format it accepts is MPEG-2 transport streams. Why do they do that? Because they're targeting cable companies, and that's what they work with. So it's not a limitation for the market that they're trying to serve with the product, but if you're, that it's a characteristic of these high volume encoders. They're very, very focused products. Elemental servers like this, limited inputs, limited outputs, but very, very high volume, and that's their focus, typically in the $20,000 to $30,000 range. The Swiss Army knife transcoders, they seem to be in the $3,000 to $5,000 range. And we'll look at some performance, how do they compare performance-wise towards the end of the session. And then I think the most interesting category, at least from my perspective, is a workflow system. And a workflow system, what this does is it integrates the encoding with a number of other functions. It can be, typically quality control is one of the important ones, but it can be operations with media asset management, or content management systems. So you're looking, what they can do, and we'll look at some examples in the next couple of slides, but they can make encoding decisions based on metadata. So if you're accepting input that's 4:3 and 16:9 and different resolutions, and you want to treat those files differently, these types of products can interrogate the file header before they start encoding, put it in a different encoding bucket, and encode it specifically based upon the output that you want for that type of input file. They can do incoming quality control. So if you're a UGC site or you're using input from disparate sources and you really care, you want to check if there's black video frames or you want to check if there's no audio before you spend the encoding time, these types of products can do that. And they can also do self-healing. So if they encode a file, they check the quality using any one of a number of metrics. They can say, well, the quality is not acceptable, we're going to encode at a higher data rate. And then, of course, if anything fails, they can send you an email or buzz you on your cell phone. And so Elemental Server can't do that. Elemental Server takes a limited set of inputs and spits out a lot of H.264 files very quickly. This is a product like Telestream Vantage, Rosette Carbon, or Rosette Workflow Systems, Digital Rapids Kayak. So here's the schema for Harmonic ProMedia Workflow Systems. You've got light. You've got your workflow controller up here, and then that can retrieve data from an FTP server or other places. Once it's in the Omnion media grid, it can pass it through the quality control component here. It can encode it via Carbon Coder or another encoding tool. It can send it out for post-encoding QC through the Rosette quality control system, and then it can send it out to a playout server or via FTP or wherever you want to send it. So when you look at this, what do you think? What's your biggest fear? Right, so you know, how these things are charged is there's a price for this, there's a price for this, there's a price for this. So all of a sudden you're not looking at the $5,000 for, you know, for Carbon Coder, or even the $26,000 for Elemental Server. You're looking at, you know, with some tools, it's $20,000 for this bit, $7,000 for this bit, $7,000 for this bit. So there's a lot of functionality, but fundamentally you're looking at a totally different value proposition. I mean, it's much more expensive. How many people integrate quality control into their workflows today? I mean, I think it's, and we'll talk about it in a second. I had this big fear. You know, I advise a lot in terms of encoding parameters, but I don't do a lot of encoding for people. You know, I'm not set up for it. It's kind of a pain. And I had this really kind of pain in the very particular customer, and I was transcoding like 4-hour DVDs. And so I had 4 4-hour DVDs by 4 streams. So he was converting DVDs into adaptive streams. And you do the math, if you want to look at every frame of that, I mean, it's, you know, 20 hours of video to watch. And then it just struck me, it's like, holy cow, I need some form of quality control. You know, because you just can't physically, you know, A, it's deathly boring, B, I mean, you just can't do it. So that's when it really struck me, you know, 2 or 3 years ago, that quality control was going to be, it's something everybody needs to consider, some people more than others. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. So this is what, you know, this is actually how you program the functionality we just saw in that chart. So you know, and this is what you actually work. You drag components in to populate these different fields. So the pre-transcode task up there, you see a quality control task. So if there's an error, I get an email. And then I want to deinterlace the video file if it needs it. I want to do that once. And then I want to transcode to 8 different targets. So this is called a workflow within the workflow system. So I transcode into 8 targets, and then I run an SSIM test, which is structured similarity, some kind of quality comparison. And then if I don't get a high enough quality there, or if they're dropped frames, this is kicked out, and I get another email. And then if everything's fine, it gets FTP'd to a website, and I get an email notification that everything's okay. So that's, you know, this is what you build to make something like that happen. And it's all, you know, it's all fairly simple. This is Telestream Vantage. And, you know, this is kind of the questions that you can set up via the, you know, via this user interface. So the first one asks, well, what's the height? Is it SD or HD? You know, once you know whether it's SD or HD, is like, is it letterboxed? Yes, no. Depending on the answers to that question, it gets pushed into one of these 2 encoding buckets, and then the file gets produced. So if you want to produce 16:9 videos differently than 4:3 videos, and HD videos differently than, you know, if you want your HD videos to go out into an 11-file adaptive group, and you want your SD videos to go out into a 4-stream adaptive group, this is a way to do that. All automated, all via the interrogation that happens at the file level when the file is input. And Digital Rapids recently came out with Kayak, and you can see the schema at least the control schema is relatively similar to what we saw with Telestream Vantage. So these are all the workflow products. You know, what are the pros? You get branching, you get quality control, you get self-healing workflows. You can see if the file quality is good enough and then re-encode if it's not. Integrated reporting for encoding and quality control. You can get quality control through third-party products, right? You can either write to their API or you can dump your encoded files into a watch folder, and then the quality control program can grab the files from the watch folder and then test them that way. But you don't get integrated reporting that way. You've got two separate systems, two separate notifications, that kind of thing. But the negative is, you know, I talked about is cost. I mean, the Harmonic, the workflow system software, is $20,000. I think that's the price for the Digital Rapids Kayak as well. And that's exclusive of encoding and quality control. So, you know, if you need this type of functionality, it's going to be expensive. And then the complexity, you know, but it's not, you know, it's complex if you're not, I mean, I'm not a programmer. That stuff was, you know, these type of interfaces were pretty intimidating at first, but you get to know it pretty easily. It's really not that bad. And you know, from a high-level perspective, you got to know what you're shopping before you start shopping. So I think it's important to kind of say, okay, this is what I want before you start to go shopping. And also, it's pretty important here. I mean, once you choose a workflow system, it's going to dictate your encoder selection. So here's the ProMedia workflow system schema. We see Carbon Coder is the encoder within this system. They have a new product out called ProMedia Express. Now you can use that within that system, but I think it would be very challenging to plug a third-party encoder into this system. You couldn't use Elemental. I mean, you might could via watch folders and that kind of thing, but if you want to get the full benefit of the workflow schema, then you're going to want to use one of the two encoders that are supported in this system. So it really does kind of dictate the choices that you're going to make. Same thing with Vantage. Vantage has two encoders you can use. One's GPU accelerated, one's software only. And then Digital Rapids, they've got a lot of encoders, but typically you're going to want to buy a Digital Rapids encoder if you're going to use the Kayak workflow system. So if you decide to go the workflow system route, you're going to have a lot fewer choices on the encoding side. Who's who? You know, this is a partial list of products in the respective categories that they're in. You know, when to consider workflow, at least from a quality control perspective. You know, if you're working from files from your professional editors, you know, they hand you a ProRes file, that's all you ever work with. You know, I think the quality control fears are fairly limited. On the other hand, if you're dealing with multiple files from multiple sources, particularly in a UGC setting, if you're delivering files to a client where you're accountable to the quality, that's when integrated quality control really starts to become important. Okay, for people who came in a bit after I started, the presentation is available now on my website, which is streaminglearningcenter.com. It's the top article. Choosing an enterprise encoder, click there. You can download here. And if you haven't used Wi-Fi in the conference so far, it's Info Today. That's the Wi-Fi system, and the password is Info Today, no capitals, one word. So you can log on to Wi-Fi and get this right now. And you know, I recommend you do that because this stuff is hard to see, and you shouldn't feel like you need to copy everything down because you can just download the presentation. Okay, so I think, you know, if you're dealing with one limited set of file groups, you know, if you've got a HDSDI port into your encoder that's coming from one or two sources, you know, I think quality control is less important. If you're dealing with a lot of different files, delivering to a lot of different customers, that's where I think quality control is a pretty important consideration. Okay, so what's the high-level buying process? I think it's very important to spend a lot of time up front identifying the required features of your system. And I think if you do a good job with this, you're going to really narrow the contenders. If you know exactly what you need, then you're going to be able to go through spreadsheets, call vendors, go through spec sheets, and then say, okay, this is the 2 or 3 candidates that really meet my requirements. Identify the features, identify all candidates that meet those features. From my perspective, every encoding vendor claims, the best possible quality. They claim our quality is better, we're faster, we've got these patented algorithms that just do a much better job than anybody else, and I've never seen any substantial difference. We'll look at some examples, and I just discount quality. Nobody's, it's a very mature market. People have been encoding H.264 for a long time. They're all reputable companies. I just don't believe that stuff. I would assume quality is the same, and then I think, once you narrow down the features and identify the real candidates, basically just choose the candidate who delivers the best price for the throughput that you need. And this is kind of an interesting graphic from Atem, who's a vendor. They're here at the show. And what's interesting is it really defines a lot of the different features that I'm talking about, right? So, do you need load balancing? Do you need content protection? Do you need added insertion? What kind of packaging do you need? Do you need loudness control for COMACT? Do you need redundancy, any kind of quality or service or quality control? So these are, it's not just taking a file and converting it to another file. It's all this stuff that you really need to consider in your buying decision. So this is what I go through when I'm working with a client. First is, what class do you need? Are you looking at Swiss Army knife transcoder, are you looking at a high volume transcoder, or are you looking for a workflow system? That's step number 1. And then step number 2 is to look at, what are the inputs, outputs, metadata support, and let's just go through these one at a time. This is Telestream Vantage, and this is kind of like, take everything from everywhere and produce it into any format for anywhere distribution. This is kind of the, the Swiss Army knife in a high volume workflow system. That's one extreme, and the other extreme is the Harmonic ProMedia Express, which again only accepts MPEG-2 transport stream input. So if you're not a cable company and that's not a relevant input for you, then this is a product that's not going to work for you. I think they'll add AVI and MOV support down the road, but they really are targeting this towards cable companies who are just transcoding their assets for OTT and streaming delivery. I think it's a really good product, but if that doesn't define you, it's not a good fit. And I guess, the high level is don't assume any of this stuff, because the products are very, very different, every one of them. And, you go through, you start out and you say, okay, what inputs do I need? Do I need Avid DNX support? Do I need ProRes support? Do I need file-based support at all? And then, get all that nailed down on the input side, and then get it all nailed down on the output side. So what are the single file formats you need to support? The ProMedia Express is so focused that you can't output an MP4 file. Okay, all you can output is HLS, smooth streaming, and HDS, and Dash will come. So again, don't assume. I was shocked. It's like every encoder in the world outputs an MP4 file, but their customers don't need it for that product, so they don't support it. So identify all the required single file and adjustable bitrate formats, and again, there's going to be a lot of difference. Not everybody supports HLS, not everybody supports HDS, and then I think you really need to ask, what are the company's plans for Dash? And actually that should be H.265 HEVC, but the HEVC session yesterday was the most crowded session I saw at the show. A lot of interest in HEVC. Elemental Server, they came out 2 or 3 months ago, I think at NAB, and they said every product we sell from now on will be field upgradable to HEVC. On the other hand, if you buy a hardware encoder that's using H.264 specific chips, it may never and likely will never be able to support HEVC. So if you see yourself moving to HEVC, and at this point you think that's got to be a consideration, ask what the company's plans are for upgrading to HEVC when it becomes relevant. How many people think VP9 might be important someday? I mean, I don't know. How many people? It's a good question to ask. Yeah, me too. But I mean, if you, you know, Google's pushing hard, and you'd hate to be, you know, if it really came down to two products, one that was going to support it and one that wasn't going to support it, you know, that might swing it in favor. I mean, at this point, I think it would be an interesting fact to know about the product that you're thinking about. I mean, these are $26,000 products, so you really need to know what it's going to support in the next 18 to 24 months. And you know, if you're in the business of delivering content to multiple distribution points, you know, whether it's iTunes or syndication sites or different cable companies, and metadata is important to you, then you're going to find a lot of different capabilities on the metadata side. How many people care about metadata? I mean, I think it's if you're syndicating your content, you've got to want to automate that, right? You can't manually prepare packages for every distribution point. Some of the encoding tools do a really good job of this, some don't. If you're in the business where metadata is important, this is something you need to know. And this is just something I pulled from the Telestream Agility. Agility is the product that Telestream bought from AnyStream, and they've since upgraded it to the Avalon version. And it just kind of captures what I was talking about from a metadata support perspective. And then there's a huge difference in which broadcast standards are supported by these encoders and which streaming standards are supported by these. So you really need to, you know, identify the standards that you need to support. Some of these are European, most of these are United States. The streaming market is very, very dynamic when it comes to closed captioning. I mean, it's chaotic is probably a better word than dynamic. I mean, it's just crazy how companies are switching formats. So you really need to know, you know, which formats do you support today, which formats are you going to support tomorrow? Because I think, you know, if you're not doing closed captioning because you're required to by law, you want to consider doing it for video, you know, search engine optimization. So closed captioning is getting to be a much more important feature for a lot of different encoding tools for a lot of different reasons, and big variation in how companies handle these capabilities. And you know, I say, fortunately, most companies have made them clear in their brochures. A lot of them just say closed captioning support, which really just doesn't tell you a thing. You know, because you really need to know which, you know, is it 608, is it 708, is it teletext, can I burn it in, how does it work from, you know, you really got to know, look, I'm producing flash files via HDS, do you pass the, you know, the captions through, yes or no? And that's the level of detail you need to get into. Okay, digital rights management. I mean, there's a couple levels here. You're going to want protection for the standard encryption, you know, the standard streaming formats, whether it's HLS or Flash or HLS and smooth streaming. If you're going to be streaming to devices, consumer electronic devices, you may be thinking about wideband support or DivX support, and not all encoding tools are going to give you that capability. Anybody here using wideband at this point? I mean, the DivX and the wideband value proposition is very compelling. I mean, there's hundreds of millions of CE devices out there that can't play HLS or smooth or Flash. So if you're really looking to reach every possible screen out there, and we know, you know, a lot of these are attached to, you know, big LCD or other types of television sets in the living room. If you really want to totally access every available screen, you need to care about consumer electronic devices, and if you want to protect it, you're going to use either DivX or wideband. So, you know, not a lot of people are doing it in this room, but I think it's something that's going to become more and more important. I think we're also going to see a lot of growth, particularly with HEVC. I think a lot of the consumer electronics products are going to pick that up pretty quickly, which, you know, so if you're producing HEVC, you want to support it, you want to play it, you've got to get it to play back on consumer electronic devices, and that's where DivX and wideband become important. you have a question? Okay, the COM Act is basically a new act from the FCC, not so new anymore. Basically requires that commercials are not substantially louder than normal programming. A lot of the encoding tools are starting to support, they have a checkbox you can check that says, okay, we're gonna limit the loudness of this video file for COM Act protection. If that's something you need to worry about, that's something you need to make sure that your encoding tool supports. That's not, I know Elemental has it, I'm guessing a lot of the other bigs have it, but it's not something you'll see in most Swiss Army knife transcoding type products. And then quality control, if you're thinking about integrating that into your entire workflow, you've got to ask, where do I want to include it? Do I want to include pre-encode before I spend any encoding resources and time on producing this product? Do you want to do it post-encode? How do you want to check the quality? Do you want to see a quantization? Does quantization exceed a certain number? Do you want to do an SSIM or PSN, a structured similarity or a signal-to-noise ratio test? So if you want to apply quality control, you need to think about what systems are available to do it, and then what are my error handling capabilities? I mean, everybody can notify if there's a problem, but can the system actually self-heal? Can it encode at a higher data rate to produce a file that has better quality? And that, I think, is a pretty cool feature that you're going to see. You're going to see a lot more. API requirements. If metadata is important. If you've got a digital asset management or a media asset management system, you're going to want to be able to tie the enterprise encoding tool into that system via the API. If you've got a website system, a CMS that you're using, you're going to want to see if you can integrate the system with that as well. So what is the API? What types of functions does it let you perform? Will it integrate with your existing systems? And then this is, if you're pursuing, and this I know from work I've done with DivX, I mean, if you're committed to working with the DivX infrastructure to try and reach the consumer electronics devices I talked about, does the encoding tool support the profiles that DivX uses to ensure playback on low power CE devices, mobile devices, and computers? Does it support the DivX DRM? So if you are kind of locked into some kind of distribution path like that, you've got to make sure that your encoding tool supports that. Yes?
The DivX thing, is that what kind of streaming protocol?
What kind of what?
Streaming, for example, if I have to stream to a C device using DivX.
DivX has, let me think. It uses its own streaming protocol. I think it's an HTTP based one. And it's because they supply the player and they've got certified playback on all the consumer electronics devices. I think it's HTTP based, and I don't think it's HLS. I think it's their own, but I could be wrong on that. I don't think they're here. But if you email me that question, I will get you an answer.
Do you know if these guys support embedded Linux?
One more time.
Embedded Linux.
Oh, do they support Linux? I'm guessing they don't, but again, if you ask me that question, I'll get it answered. So, I mean, DivX's focus really is consumer electronics devices. And although a lot of them run Linux, so, that they may support it. And I think, we talked, a list of 8 or 9 different requirements. I think, depending on who you are, maybe your requirements are so general that there's a laundry list of products that meet your needs. But I think if you need digital asset management support, if you need metadata support, if you need, quality control, you're really going to be limited to 2 or 3 products at this point. And from this point on, we're going to look at quality in a second, but I would say quality, just assume that's a wash. And from my perspective, it comes down to, what's the cost performance? And we're going to see some products are 5 times faster than other products. So that really factors into the cost, right? I mean, if you can buy one Elemental server for $26,000 that produces, X files per hour, or you can, buy one software encoder that does 1/10 of the work in an hour, then to produce the equivalent quality, you need 10 times the software. You need to buy 10 of the software encoders. So that's a very, you can't really talk about price without looking at performance, because what we need is throughput. You've got to produce a certain number of files, every day, whatever that is. And we'll look at that in a second. So let's look at some quality comparisons. And again, you're not going to have a good experience on this screen. You'll get a great experience on the PDF file if you download it. This is we see 4 different products here, and I just apologize for the quality, but it is available much more clearly on the downloadable PDF. One's a little bit darker, one's a little bit lighter, but the detail is relatively similar. And this file is produced very aggressively. It's 720p to 800 kilobits per second. So if there were drastic differences in the quality, you would see a pretty significant difference here. Same thing, we've got, Elemental is by far the fastest encoder. Does that come in a significant quality loss? Maybe the detail is a little bit less than the others, but we're not seeing anything that no customer would look at one of these and say, my goodness, that's wonderful, the others are trash. I mean, you're looking at products that are very, very similar in terms of the output quality. Elemental versus Vantage. I like this particular scene because the ballet dancer is panning across the stage and it's very hard to encode. We've also got this window frame in the background that shows a lot of detail. The Vantage encoding tool does retain a little bit more detail than Elemental. But what really makes quality comparisons tough are things like this. So this is a tool called Bitrate Viewer that compares the data rate of the 2 files. And the data rate's really close, or I hope it's close. So the data rate here is 247 kilobits per second. Here it's 242 kilobits per second, so within like 1 or 2%. The problem is with the Vantage file, the data rate started out low for the low moving segments and increased for the higher moving segments. Now I asked for a CBR file. So what Elemental gave me was a perfect CBR file, right? So the hard to compress and the easy to compress regions use the same data rate. This is the average data rate right here. The Vantage product started out low, so the data rate here, where that panning sequence is a little bit higher. So you can say, okay, it looks like Vantage has a little bit more quality here, but is that a data rate issue or is it an encoder issue? So it's really, you're not seeing anything that's, first of all, no customer would look at this in real time and see any difference at all. So I think it's commercially irrelevant. But even when you look at it frame by frame, side by side, with the data rate varying, the way we're seeing it in this tool, it just makes the quality difference very hard to really quantify.
Yeah, you saw anything like IIL where they guys are claiming that radical reductions in file size?
So question is, have I looked at IIL, the people, and that's the people Netflix are using, or? Yeah, I have not seen them.
Anyone else that's doing anything similar?
I've looked at, so I get a bunch of people claiming a bunch of things, and some I've looked at and I've reviewed, and some I've looked at, and what I do at this point is I just send them my test files, and I send them results from other vendors, and I say, if you're substantially better, just show me, and typically they just go away. And I'm not saying, IIL, if Netflix is interested, I'm sure they have something, but I've just not played with it. Okay, so if we assume quality is the same, how do we make how do we distinguish? And I think performance, we see a huge difference in throughput. And we were looking at 5 products here. 3 are software-based, 2 are GPU accelerated. GPU is the graphics processing unit, so it's the ability to use your NVIDIA GPU in your system to help accelerate encoding. And so these 2, Episode Engine and ProMedia Carbon, are produced on my, I guess it's the 3.33 gigahertz Z800 workstation, 24 cores, pretty stout workstation. ProMedia ProMedia Express is produced on the ProMedia 5200, which is the server level system that costs, we'll see a price on it in a second, but that's the hardware that Harmonic sells with. You can buy software only, but they recommend you get the hardware. Elemental Server is the Elemental Server box, and Vantage Lightspeed is the Vantage Lightspeed box from Telestream. So there's two tests. Both of these are H.264. I have a 52-minute 1080p file that I produce out to the same 11 presets. So I produce presets on all these products. They use the same profile, same resolution, same data rate, same, as closely as I can make them equivalent. And we see very, very significant differences, not only between the software guys. Here's Engine is actually pretty competent. ProMedia Carbon, which is the old Rosette Carbon coder, which I thought was, in its day, was one of the fastest systems I ever saw, produced these 11 files in 2 hours and 35 minutes compared to 25 minutes for Elemental Server. So again, to produce the same kind of throughput with this product, you would need something like, 6 of them. Okay, so all of a sudden, the $26,000 for Elemental Server or the $26,000 for ProMedia Express doesn't look so bad, because each one of those software licenses needs a hardware platform to play it on, and they're not free. Okay, so I think, this is probably the most, perhaps the most important screen we've seen so far. One test is kind of a pure throughput test, and this is 24 one-minute DV files. This is like an administrative file handling test, and we see different, the Lightspeed system does very well here compared to Elemental Server, where it's not really good on long-form production. So if you're producing 2 or 3 minute videos, the Vantage Lightspeed actually looks pretty good. If you're producing, 2-hour movies, then the Vantage Lightspeed, looks pretty bad, both compared to Elemental Server and ProMedia Express. And then I think you need to factor this, we talked initially up front, it's like, what's the throughput do you need? What throughput do you need? And, throughput is tied to pricing, because ProMedia Express costs $26,000. It comes with the ProMedia 5200 application server. ProMedia Carbon is $5,000. So which is more expensive? Well, this produces in 155 minutes what ProMedia Express produces in 35 minutes. So you need 5 of these, because you can't buy 0.4 of any system. You need 5 of these to produce the same throughput as that. That's going to cost you $25,000 in software alone. And if you spend $6,000 on hardware for each system, that's another $30,000. So it's $54,000 for the software alternative just to get the same throughput. And you've got to drive 5 computers instead of 1 computer for, and that's going to jack up your operational cost. So when you look at pricing, you really, what are my requirements from a throughput perspective, and how do they compare from a performance perspective? How many of this one do I need to produce the same throughput as this one? And that's a critical analysis that you have to perform. Okay, a couple other things to consider when you're looking at pricing is the concept of scalability. What do you do when one encoder isn't enough? What does it cost you? So some of these encoders, like Squeeze Server, Elemental Server, and Episode Engine, are cluster encoders. You buy a bunch of them. There's no server. They distribute jobs among themselves. There's no single point of failure. If you want to add another system, you just buy another system. The other model is the controller node model, which is what we saw with the workflow systems, right? There's a server sitting on top of the entire process. You can throw multiple encoders in the process, but you have a single point of failure. If that server fails, your farm goes down. So if you're looking at pricing a system with failover, and you're looking at this type of operating schema, you need two servers with failover. And a server is not only the hardware, sometimes it's the database, sometimes it's server software. So you really need to go in saying, I need this, I need 24/7, I need failover, I need this throughput, what's it going to cost me? And then you need to price out each component that's necessary to that configuration. And a couple of final points. Just remember the cost of the computer when you're comparing hardware versus software. I think $6,000 is, how many people think that's too high for how many people think it's too low? How many people just want to leave? We're pardon?
Is it 5,000 for the software or the computer?
The computer. So you got to buy a computer, right? The computer's going to be dual core something. It's going to have 16 gigabytes of RAM. It's going to have Windows 7, perhaps. Maybe it's Unix, but you're looking at. My Z800 costs $10,000, so you don't need something that's that well spec'd. But you need you're not going to buy a Dell at Walmart. So so the high level point is you need to factor that cost in when the software is not just the software, it's the software plus the machine to run it on. This is really critical. Are you clustering or do you have a server node configuration where, if failover is unacceptable, or if a single point of failure is unacceptable, then what's it cost you to make sure that you continue to run? And that can get pretty pricey. Okay, any questions? Go ahead.
Concerning the API, do you know which servers would have the best one, the one that's more fully implemented? Because often the API is just a second thought. They're often not really run.
Which server has the best API? I've heard a bunch of different things, but I think that the nice thing about an API is it's free and you can download it, and you can spend a couple of hours and figure that out and kind of draw your own conclusion. You can't?
No, like Telestream before.
To look at it before you?
To use.
Okay.
17 size for episode and the API is different from Vantage.
You can't even look at it without.
All you're going to do is documentation.
Pardon?
All your documentation.
Okay.
To get the
Oh, yeah.
documentation, you need to sign an NDA and all that stuff first.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean,
so you can't just go online and just look at all the APIs.
Okay. Then I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't. Anybody have any horror stories or? Pardon?
I had a question.
Go ahead.
These people publish MTBF numbers?
I'm sorry. What number?
Meantime between
Oh, not that I've seen. Good question. So does anybody publish mean time between failures? Not that I've seen. You had a question in the back?
Have you compared this with Amazon's latest transcoding offering?
Okay, so have I compared this to any cloud offering? No, but Stream Media is going to do a cloud review over the next 2 or 3 months, and we're going to look at that, specifically. So how many people are considering cloud? Cloud's getting more compelling, right? Bandwidths are faster. The whole scalability concept's really nice. The failover concept's really nice.
You still doing an encoder before sending something down unless you have, I use ProRes as my intermediate.
Right.
I wouldn't upload any ProRes.
Yeah, and that's a great point. But you don't need to encode 11 of them.
Yeah, exactly.
You can encode one, and
The local encoder, that's
right.
nice.
So the question was you still need to, or the comment was you still need to encode once before you upload, and that's correct because ProRes is probably too big for.
Gary, what's available here?
Say it again.
Are you selling your books here?
Yes, I think I have 2 left. So, thanks for asking. Any other questions? Okay, thanks for coming.